Welcome to the third part in our ongoing series aimed at defining the regressive left and distinguishing it from the liberal left. As we've outlined in the first part, what characterizes the left as a whole is the idea that traditions should be rebelled against and criticized in order to create a more enlightened society. Self-criticism is therefore one of the most important characteristics of a liberal. Radical leftists, on the other hand, do not self-criticize, since they believe they already know how society can be made better, and have blind faith in the utopian ideology. I have previously argued that the regressive left is a unique case of the radical left, in that it no longer claims to hold the utopian ideology, and yet in any other way it still thinks in radical terms. In this part we will see how this applies to self-criticism, and what disastrous results it leads to. Now, self-criticism is always important, but there are times when it is more urgent. Another important liberal maxim is that cultures change and evolve, and at times they take a turn for the worse, and need to be mercilessly dissected to help them out of it. One of the best examples is European culture in the first half of the 20th century, and all the atrocities it committed. After World War II, many Europeans tried to convince themselves that the problem was merely due to extreme groups like the Nazis and the Bolsheviks, but there were also liberals brave enough to realize that these groups are only symptoms of a much deeper disease. One of the first was the French philosopher Albert Camus, whose 1951 book The Rebel goes back and criticizes the entire history of Western civilization, but focuses mainly on the modern age, and shows how the ideas of enlightenment took wrong turns that resulted in the emergence of fascism and communism. For that, Camus was shunned and pilloried by his leftist friends, who preferred to hold on to their Marxist dogmas. But other thinkers followed him, realizing that European culture needs a root canal treatment. Their criticisms undermined the ideas at the basis of fascism and communism, and bolstered Western culture against the prospects of their re-emergence. Nowadays, it is the Muslim culture that has taken a turn for the worse, making life miserable for people in Muslim countries, and also for people of the non-Muslim countries who are getting the ricochets. And there are brave Muslim or ex-Muslim liberals who are trying to criticize Islam, who realize it needs a root canal treatment. But, to their dismay, these liberals find that they are being attacked by so-called Western liberals, who accuse them of internalizing bigoted views against Islam. Why have Western liberals turned on their own kind, and on their own values? The answer is simple. The people attacking the Muslim reformers are not liberals, they are regressives. They adhere to identity politics, and to the pyramid of oppression we've described in part 2. So they believe that they must always defend the oppressed, those who are lower in the pyramid. They consider the Muslims to be very low in the pyramid, so they feel obliged to defend them and their Muslim identity. But there are also true liberals in the West. Liberals who realize that their duty is to support the Muslim reformers, and also to criticize Islam and pressure its adherents to reflect on its problems. One of the liberals who are most vocal on this issue is Sam Harris, who, like a true liberal, is self-criticizing the Western left for its stance on the issue. On October 2014, he was invited by Bill Maher, another liberal who is very vocal on the issue, to talk about it on his TV show. Actor Ben Affleck, a regular Hollywood passive regressive, was also on the panel, leading to this now infamous altercation.
You want to talk about the treatment of women and homosexuals and free thinkers and public intellectuals in the Muslim world. I would argue that liberals have failed us. And the crucial point of confusion, thank you.
Thank God you're here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the crucial point of confusion is that we have been sold this meme of Islamophobia, where every criticism of the doctrine of Islam gets conflated with bigotry toward Muslims as people.
Right.
And that is it's intellectually ridiculous. Even it gets
So hold on, are
racism.
you the person who understands the officially codified doctrine of Islam? You're the interpreter of that, so you can say, well, this is. I think
I'm actually well educated on this topic.
I'm asking you. So you're saying if I criticize you're saying that Islamophobia is not a real thing.
Well, I'm not denying that certain people are bigoted against Muslims as people, and that's a problem.
Big of you.
But
why are you so hostile about this? It's gross. It's racist.
It's not. But it's so nuts.
It's like saying those stateless, shifty Jews.
So Affleck immediately accuses Harris of bigotry, because that's what his regressive instinct drives him to do. The principle of self-criticism, which is so central to leftist thought, has been warped in Western regressive thinking into self-blame. Western regressives will explain every problem as the result of the West's actions, which stem out of bigotry. So, in the regressive mind, the way to solve these problems is to eradicate our own bigotry. This is what Affleck is doing here. Of course, Affleck does recognize that there are bad Muslims out there, like ISIS, but he refuses to entertain the notion that ISIS is merely a symptom of a larger problem, of bad ideas that are pervasive in the Muslim culture.
We have to be able to criticize bad ideas. And
of course we do. No liberal doesn't want to criticize bad
ideas. But Islam at this moment is the motherlode of bad ideas.
Jesus.
So
the most important part of what Harris said here is the stipulation that he is talking about this moment. If he had said that Islam always has been and always will be the motherlode of bad ideas, then Affleck would have had a point. There have been times in history when Muslim culture was more peaceful and enlightened than other cultures. But Harris is talking about this moment, and at this moment, Muslim culture is the problem. On the other hand, when you criticize it and try to make it better, you can't focus only on this moment, but you have to criticize the history of Islam, and ask how it got to its current sorry state. Affleck is incapable of grasping these nuances. When he hears Islam as a whole being criticized, he thinks Maher and Harris are claiming that it is inherently evil, and will always be the same.
Or how about the more than a billion people who aren't fanatical, who don't punish women, who just want to go to the store,
wait a second, wait a second,
don't do any of the things that you're saying all Muslims
wait a second,
stereoting.
Wait a second.
Things and you painting the whole religion with that same brush.
This is one of the biggest flaws of the regressive mind. Harris and Maher are talking about pernicious ideas that are pervasive in today's Muslim culture. They are not defining Islam by these ideas, and they are not saying that all Muslims hold these ideas. Yet Affleck still claims that this is what they are doing. And it's not just Ben Affleck. The other participants on the panel also react to Harris by trying to convince him that not all Muslims hold these ideas, even though he fully agrees with them on this point. The regressive mind is geared towards fighting bigots, those who stereotype an entire group. When the regressives encounter someone who criticizes a group without stereotyping it, they are incapable of processing it. Instead of dealing with the criticism itself, they will revert to the not all argument. One of the main proponents of the not all argument is Reza Aslan, a well-spoken Muslim scholar who is the American TV network's favorite Islam apologist. Aslan is trying to convince us that Islam simply has some violent extremists like every other religion has, and he uses the not all technique to deflect any uncomfortable questions.
Does Islam promote violence?
Islam doesn't promote violence or peace. Islam is just a religion, and like every religion in the world, it depends on what you bring to it. If you're a violent person, your Islam, your Judaism, your Christianity, your Hinduism is going to be violent. There are marauding Buddhist monks in Myanmar slaughtering women and children. Does Buddhism promote violence? Of course not. People are violent or peaceful, and that depends on their politics, their social world, the way that they see their communities, the way they see themselves.
So Reza, you don't think that there's anything more, there's the justice system in Muslim countries you don't think is somehow more primitive or subjugates women more than in other countries?
Did you hear what you just said? You said in Muslim countries. I just told you that Indonesia, women are absolutely 100% equal to men. In Turkey, they have had more female representatives, more female heads of state in Turkey than we have in the United States.
But in Pakistan,
stop saying things like Muslim countries.
So Aslan shifts the debate from talking about Islam to talking about individual Muslim countries, allowing him to use the not all argument. He of course neglects to mention that Turkey and Indonesia are both relatively secular Muslim countries, so their example actually serves to strengthen the argument that the problem is Islam. But the regressives fail to detect it, and view Aslan in high regard. One of Aslan's biggest fans is Cenk Uygur, the CEO of the Young Turks, one of the most influential names in left-wing media. On YouTube, the Young Turks channel basically functions as the motherlode of aggressive ideas, which Cenk and his cronies feed to their millions of subscribers. When we talk about the not all argument, no one uses it more than Cenk. After the Harris-Affleck incident, Cenk made a 25-minute video which basically said just one thing. Harris and Maher are telling you that it's all Muslims, and I'm here to tell you that it's not.
But to think that all the aunts and uncles, moms and grandparents that are Muslim, over 1 billion of them, are all radicals. No. Well, that's almost the definition of bigotry.
And when Cenk and Reza met and discussed the issue, here's the conclusion they came up with.
This is what Bill Maher and Sam Harris mean when they say liberals don't refuse to criticize Islam. What they mean is liberals refuse to condemn all Muslims like we do.
That's exactly right. And unfortunately, yes, we won't agree to that, which is not true. I think, if everybody
By the way,
thinks their
it's not even liberalism. That's not a liberal view.
To blanketly say all people in this faith think the same thing is counterfactual, counterproductive, and not what liberals think.
Here's where we see the regressive modus operandi. Since they are incapable of dealing with the actual argument, the regressives would rather paint their opponents as bigots, who are only using rational arguments to mask their bigotry. This led to the coining of a new word, bigoteering, which means labeling someone as a bigot so you can then silence them. Since bigotry is now taboo in Western society, this is an effective technique of discrediting someone. Again and again, when liberals are trying to make a nuanced point about a certain protected group, they are being accused of generalizing about everyone in that group, and have to clarify that they are not. It has become somewhat of a joke among liberals, and the hashtag #NotAll was created to mock this regressive tactic. Actually, it's not only liberals. Almost everybody in the West today knows that you shouldn't generalize, and any respectable right-winger agrees to that too, which makes the whole ritual feel like a waste of time, just a regressive attempt to derail the conversation. We all know that it's not all. Actually, no, not all. Not all of us know that it's not all. There's been at least one memorable case in recent history of someone who failed that test. Someone who made a sweeping statement about Muslims, clarified that he was talking about all Muslims, and remained adamant about it even when called out on it. Can you guess who I'm talking about? It was a pretty famous case. You probably saw it. Think back. Remember?
Or how about the more than a billion people who aren't fanatical, who don't punish women, who just want to go to the store,
wait a second. Wait a second.
and don't do any of the things that you're saying all Muslims
wait a second.
stereotyping.
Wait a second.
Things, and you painting the whole group religion with that.
Let's get down to who has the right answer here. A billion people, you say. All these billion people don't hold any of these...
Five or something.
Don't hold these pernicious beliefs?
No,
I would.
well, they don't.
That's just not true, Ben. That's just not true.
Would you like to see that again?
Let's get down to who has the right answer here. A billion people, you say. All these billion people don't hold any of these...
Five or something.
Don't hold these pernicious beliefs?
No,
I would.
well, they don't.
That's just not true, Ben. That's just not true.
So Ben Affleck is saying no, but it's a double negative. He means yes. All Muslims. All 1.6 billion of them. Except ISIS. All 1.6 billion Muslims don't have any racist beliefs. All 1.6 billion Muslims don't have any sexist or homophobic beliefs. All 1.6 billion Muslims have no pernicious views whatsoever. They just want to make sandwiches and go to school. This is bigotry of the highest order. Affleck is treating Muslims as if they are not human beings. And when you dehumanize a group of people in such a way, you can't possibly have a constructive conversation about them. We shouldn't make too much of Affleck's bigotry here. Anyone can say stupid things in the heat of a debate. The question is what happens on the next day, after everyone had time to cool down and think about it. You might expect Affleck to be called out on his words and asked to clarify that it's not all. But here's what actually happened.
I was watching it late at night, right? I couldn't sleep, and I was listening to Ben Affleck, and every single thing he said I agreed with. I understood his frustration of not being able to get it out, and I wrote on my Twitter, Ben Affleck for president.
What I loved how you could see him fuming and building up.
Well, here's the issue. There are people who believe that. There are Muslims who believe that. There are tons who do not.
Right.
This is how the passive aggressives reacted. They did not even try to understand the arguments. They saw Harris and Maher attacking a supposedly oppressed group. They saw Affleck defending it, so they just took Affleck's side. Like trained dogs, they just spouted the tired old platitudes that liberals use to fight against bigotry, not realizing that they are actually taking the side of the bigot in this debate. But it's not just the regressives. In the online discussions following the debate, I saw many liberals defending Harris and Maher from the bigoteering that the regressives were doing to them, but I saw no one point out Affleck's bigotry. Even liberals and conservatives failed to spot it. Ask yourself, did you notice it before I just pointed it out? If not, it shows that your mind too is infected with that defect of the liberal mind, the defect that makes us unable to detect this type of bigotry. And that is because we go too far in trying to understand and defend the other, until we stop treating them as humans. In defending them against demonization, we're instead turning them into angels, and that is just as dehumanizing and just as harmful. This is one of the defects that allow the regressive cancer to spread. Alright, so we don't expect sophisticated political thought from this sewing circle. How about Mr. Not All himself, Cenk Uygur? Surely he would have had something to say about Affleck's generalizing of more than 1 billion people.
People, you say. All these billion people don't hold any of these...
Five or something.
Don't hold these pernicious beliefs?
No,
I wouldn't... Well,
they don't.
That's just not true, Ben. That's just not true.
Can I just express how I...
Okay, bingo, right there. That's the biggest problem in this whole thing. Bill Maher saying no, over 1 billion Muslims. All of them. Not a small minority, not even, a significant minority. No, he said that's just not true. All of them hold those opinions. He might not have literally said all, but when Affleck talked about over 1 billion people, Maher said that's not true. They do hold those. Over 1 billion people hold what? Radical views.
So, it appears that Cenk just lied to your face and gave a description that is the exact opposite of what actually happened. And on the basis of this lie, he then went on to build his case that Maher and Harris are bigots. How could he possibly think he could get away with it? He didn't. He actually believes that this is what happened. I've watched enough Young Turks videos to see him do the same thing many times, always unaware how foolish it makes him look. Cenk hears what he wants to hear, and he will always hear his opponents talking in a way that will allow him to bigoteer them. And unfortunately, there are enough viewers out there whose minds have been molded by regressive notions, so they are incapable of detecting what he is doing. Here is one of the most egregious examples of this process. In July 2016, following a string of violent attacks on policemen in America, conservative politician Sarah Palin berated the mainstream media for failing to report on the violence and hate emanating from the Black Lives Matter movement, and the atmosphere of hatred towards cops that it was creating. Here's how Cenk heard it.
They're not protesters. These are thugs. They're rioters. And I'm calling out the media saying, quit claiming that these rioters are peaceful. They're stomping on our flag, figuratively and literally, shouting death to cops, celebrating violence. It's sick. And I think that the media is perpetuating a message that really evil people are thriving on right now.
But let's note there that she said these protesters, they're not people. The point of Black Lives Matter is to get people to realize that black people are also people. She just literally said they're not people. Amazing.
Amazing indeed. Palin says the rioters aren't peaceful, and Cenk hears her saying that blacks aren't people. How could he think that he could possibly get away with such blatant bigoteering?
No self-awareness at all.
Exactly. He wasn't doing it on purpose. He really thought that this is what she said. This so-called journalist is so ignorant about the world that he thinks that it is even possible that anyone would make such a statement on American media. His total lack of self-awareness reaches hilarious heights later in the video, when...
Okay, she says, media, quit claiming the rioters are peaceful.
Yep, he actually has Palin's statement in print before him, and even then it doesn't register with him that he heard it wrong. And, based on that misconstruing, Cenk can then go on to do his usual thing.
Stomp on our flag, shout death to cops. No evidence for any of this.
Cenk begins by generalizing about all Black Lives Matter people. A quick YouTube search would have presented Cenk with ample evidence to everything that Palin says, but he refuses to even look and claims that there's no evidence. When it comes to black people, a protected group in the regressive mind, Cenk doesn't think to say not all, and admit that some of them are violent. All blacks are angels in his mind.
They're peaceful protests. It's thugs, all thugs, rioters. They're not even people.
And so we get to the usual not all argument. Sarah Palin was talking specifically about the rioters, but Cenk claims that she was talking about all Black Lives Matter people.
Who would do that? Who would categorize an entire group of people, entire group of protesters with the actions of one lone madman? A person who thinks they're all the same, those non-people.
And finally, the conclusion. Palin says that about Black Lives Matter because she is a racist who thinks that blacks aren't even people. The bigoteer and smear job is complete. Why would Cenk do that? How can he possibly be so unaware? There is only one possible answer. Cenk Uygur is not just a bigoteer. Cenk Uygur is a bigot. The reason why Cenk heard Palin say that blacks aren't people is because this is what he expects her to say. In his mind, conservatives are all bigots. If you watch his videos, you will realize that he never bothers to actually try to understand the arguments that conservatives are making. He just takes up some of the words they say and swings them up together to justify the image he has of them. He isn't even aware that he is doing it. His mind is so steeped in these stereotypes that he actually believes that this is what they are saying. But the thing about bigotry is that once you let it enter your mind, it starts to eat away at everything. It has now spread to how he views liberals as well, and it does the same to people like Sam Harris and Bill Maher. And the fact that the Young Turks are still so popular among the regressive left shows that it is a widespread phenomenon. Hold on, you might say. You have been telling us all along how wrong it is to bigoteer someone. Aren't you bigoteering, Cenk? Indeed, this is not something that I do lightly. To clarify, the fact that he bigoteers other people is not enough to make him a bigot. Plenty of regressives are bigoteering simply because they don't understand what bigotry is, or because they join the herd. But in Cenk's case, as we've seen, it is driven by the stereotypes that he has of certain groups. He is displaying the workings of a deeply prejudiced mind. Now, that too is not enough to make him a bigot. We all have prejudices. The question is how we react when our prejudices are pointed out to us. Do we try to overcome them? And here's where Cenk consistently fails. He has been called out on his prejudices numerous times, but he refuses to change. Here is how he reacted after the entire internet had a laugh at his expense for the Palin video.
So I thought she said that they are not people. It turns out, I think that in this proper context, it is that she did say they were not peaceful.
Yes, Cenk, thank you. Thank you for admitting that maybe you got it wrong. But what else should you be doing, I'm sure that each and every one of you, if you have any common decency, knows what Cenk should be doing now after admitting his mistake. Did he apologize to Palin for the slanderous smear job he did on her? Don't be silly. He just doubled down on the other lies he made in the video.
Now, the essence of that video was overall absolutely right. She said Black Lives Matter is responsible for the violence. She said they're thugs.
Only a total bigot would not understand what an outrage it is to say what he said about Palin, to suggest that she thinks that blacks aren't people. Cenk admits that he got it wrong this time, but he still believes that this is what she thinks, and so he doesn't think he owes her an apology. And this is one of the biggest problems with the regressives. They got so used to using bigoteering as a tool that they don't treat bigotry as a big deal anymore, and they made it okay to be a bigot. Furthermore, it made them incapable of detecting actual bigotry, and so they allow it to run rampant in their own camp. Cenk's persistent bigotry is not the fault of him alone. If it wasn't for the regressive bubble that protects him and validates his actions, he would have been forced to deal with it, and since he does not want to be a bigot, there's a chance he would have liberated his mind of it. But since so many people on the regressive left are like him, he can remain oblivious to it. Alright, enough of Cenk, for now. Let's talk about what he was protecting here. The Black Lives Matter movement. Black Lives Matter is a protest movement that sprang in response to several cases of police killing of unarmed black Americans, some of them caught on camera. The claim is that the police care less about killing blacks than killing whites, so we must remind them that black lives do matter. A look at the footage, however, reveals a more complicated picture. Sometimes the editing is questionable, sometimes the police action seems justified. Mostly it is cops reacting to a tough situation in a less than perfect manner, but not necessarily due to racism. There are some cases of obvious police brutality, but then there are similar videos of police brutality against white people that don't get the same media coverage. A look at the statistics also does not conclusively support the claim that the police are racist. It's true that more unarmed black people are shot per capita, but some studies suggest that the disparity goes away once we factor in all the variables. It appears that the root of the problem is not racism in the American police, but since focusing on the police allows BLM to create a narrative that says blacks are being murdered by the system, this is what they choose to focus on. Still, many liberals supported the Black Lives Matter movement when it started, and thought it would be a good idea to look into the issue of police misconduct. In August 2015, BLM published a 10-point plan called Campaign Zero, containing fairly reasonable suggestions for reforming the police. But then, the movement was gradually taken over by regressive logic.
So right now, we're going to honor this space, and we're going to honor the memory of Michael Brown, and we're going to honor all of the Black lives lost this year, and we're going to honor the fact that I have to fight through all these people who said, my life matters! That I
we see BLM activists storming a Bernie Sanders rally uninvited, and then proceeding to complain that he didn't just yield to them, claiming that this is because he and his liberal white supporters are all racists. In other words, they are not trying to work within the democratic system to improve it as liberals would, but take the radical route of characterizing Western society as a white supremacist patriarchy. And this is the way of thinking that has completely taken over Black Lives Matter, destroying any chance it had to bring about any sort of positive change. In part 2, we described how identity politics were hijacked by the regressive left and changed the purpose. It used to be about equality of opportunity, about ensuring that everyone had the same opportunity as straight white males. Now it's about equality of outcome, about how the fact that straight white males are doing better proves that the system is oppressive to everyone else. Based on that, regressives are bigoteering all straight white males. It's not just Black Lives Matter that are doing it, it's prevalent in regressive leftist thought. One good example is the popular YouTube channel BuzzFeed. A typical BuzzFeed video has a title like 26 Questions Asians Have for White People, and has Asian Americans complain about prejudices they encounter in American society. That's fine, but why is it addressed at white people? Why not call it 26 Questions Asians Have for Non-Asians? Do you honestly believe that only white people have those prejudices? Or are you just bigoteering whites, because that's what the cool regressives do? Because of this attitude, BuzzFeed has earned the reputation of a racist and sexist channel. When one of its employees was confronted with this was his defense.
You cannot be racist against white people! Here's why. So the Oxford Dictionary defines racism as prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against someone of a different race based on the belief that one's own race is superior. So yes, prejudice and discrimination can be directed at all races, including white people, but racism is a different thing because of that last part about superior. Racism can be broadly defined to encompass individual and group prejudices and acts of discrimination that result in material and cultural advantages conferred on a majority or dominant social group. Who has been the dominating and subduing force since, like, ever?
I believe it was Asian people, for most of human history. But here we once again encounter the regressive propensity to misconstrue liberal principles, even when they have it in print in front of them. He starts out by reading the definition of racism, but then completely twists it around, and explains it by quoting a Wikipedia article that erroneously uses the definition of systemic racism to define racism. Then he proceeds to base it on the racism equals power plus prejudice equation that was developed in the studies of systemic racism. And here's where we realize where he gets his misguided views from. It comes from the academy. The idea that racism equals prejudice plus power is controversial even in the academy. The logic behind it is that when one race controls all the institutions in society, its prejudices towards other races become ingrained in the culture. The prejudices held by the oppressing race therefore have much worse effects than the prejudices held by the oppressed races, so we must distinguish between them. But in today's Western society, no race has all the institutional power, so this should no longer apply. But, of course, here we go back to the pyramid of oppression discussed in part 2, which allows the regressives to keep claiming that whites have all the power. Many faculties today teach their students that non-whites are oppressed in today's society, and then they teach them the racism equals prejudice plus power equation. This leads to two conclusions. First, since all people have prejudices, and since whites have all the power, that means that all white people are racists. Secondly, since the other races have no power, they cannot be racist. And this is the way of thinking that infests the Black Lives Matter movement, and erases any form of liberal thought that was in it at the start. In August 2016, several Black Lives Matter groups got together to write a new manifesto, which they called Platform. In this new manifesto, the idea of reforming the police is pretty much forgotten, replaced basically by a demand to turn the United States into a socialist utopia. That in itself is legitimate. The problem is how it is couched in the overall narrative. The narrative now is basically that black people are being murdered by a system that holds on to power instead of becoming that socialist utopia. And because of that, blacks have the right to fight back. And so, it has turned to violence. On top of that, the regressive notion that blacks cannot be racist is allowing many blacks to let their inner bigot express itself. Take for instance this Facebook post written by Yusra Khogali, co-founder of Black Lives Matter Toronto, which declares that whiteness is not humaneness. In fact, white skin is subhuman. All phenotypes exist within the black family, and white people are a genetic defect of blackness. And this is just one example out of many of black supremacy that is allowed to pollute the public sphere in today's America. And in such an atmosphere, terrorist acts can also flourish. In July 2016, a black man named Gavin Long ambushed and shot 6 policemen in Baton Rouge, killing 3 of them before he was shot dead. Long had his own YouTube channel, in which he uploaded videos talking about the need to fight back against the police.
You gotta fight back. That's the only way a bully knows to quit. He doesn't know words.
Here is how he reacted to a video that showed 2 cops applying excessive force to arrest a pregnant black woman.
So, this is what I see. I'm not thinking. I see 2 men, both armed, attacking a pregnant woman who was not attempting to harm them. And by the city defending the cops, they are legally defending tyranny. This is the definition. Legally and literally defending tyranny. And you know, when it comes to tyranny with me, rebellion is a responsibility. I'm not sitting and watching. I don't know what I would do. And he says he'll get the tire iron. I don't know what I'll do.
He says he'll get the tire iron? Who said that? Who is Gavin talking about here? Do we know? Well, turns out that this video is a reaction video, reacting to someone else who made a video about this incident. And as you can see, this video he is watching is suggesting that violence might be the answer. Who made that video? Who was it that nudged Gavin Long down the road to violence? Who was it that validated his belief that he is fighting against tyranny? Who is Gavin reacting to? He is reacting to the Young Turks.
So what do you do in that situation? You just have to walk away and let an agent of the state brutalize a pregnant woman.
You take out your phone, you record it, but you know, it was already recorded.
So you just what if they started punching her?
Right. Then
so you just let it go?
I don't know. What would you do?
At what point do you step in?
What point do you step in?
I would open my trunk and get a tire iron and then call my dad.
This Young Turk is Jimmy Dore, and he has his own crusade going. Ever since the Black Lives Matter thing began, the Young Turk served as a propaganda outlet for the movement, promoting its narrative, minimizing its darker sides, and magnifying every case of blacks killed by police, always misreporting them to make them seem worse. But Jimmy goes even further. He is on a personal vendetta mission against cops, and he is riding TYT's propaganda machine to incite against them.
They like to shoot. They like killing people. They like being brutal. That's why they're cops. I know that might shock people when I say that. Well, what else kind of person would become a cop if you don't enjoy being brutal? You don't think we're occupied by police? We are. Boys, cops are freaking criminals. We need them, and we need to keep them on a short leash. Because they're all of them. I'm not saying some of them. I'm saying all of them are criminals. You can see what kind of animals these cops are. Animals. And this isn't the 1% of bad cops. This is all cops. This is the culture.
So, suddenly culture does matter. And suddenly it's okay to say that a certain group of people are not people but animals. And apparently, in the case of policemen, it's okay to say that it's all of them. This is the kind of hate speech that Jimmy Dore is allowed to spew on the TYT channel, and no one feels obliged to tell him that it's not all. A few days after this video was uploaded, TYT subscriber Gavin Long became a dead murderer. The Young Turks are in the very least complicit in helping to create the atmosphere that pushed him to do it. Did it make them stop and reflect? Not in the slightest. The video they made of the shooting focused mainly on trying to prove that Long had no connection to Black Lives Matter, and neglected to mention his connection to TYT. What they did do was file a copyright claim against his videos that related to them, thus trying to conceal that connection. YouTube did take the videos down, but Cenk, all those videos you made on police shootings should have taught you by now that in today's world, you can't cover your tracks. There will always be someone lurking in the shadows, documenting your actions. And, unfortunately for you, so it was in this case as well. Someone was there to save the video in time, allowing us to see you for what you really are. Yes, Cenk, you guessed it. The atheist Rue sends his regards. Elsewhere around the world, these regressive attitudes have more serious effects. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict celebrates its 100th year anniversary this year, and there's no end in sight. But some are trying to bring change. In the late 1980s, there were some Palestinian leaders who were brave enough to defy 70 years of Palestinian rejectionism and recognize Israel's right to exist. This led to a peace process aimed at establishing a two-state solution, and there were enough Israelis brave enough to agree to the Palestinians having self-rule in parts of the West Bank and Gaza, even though this exposed the Israeli population to terrorist attacks. Terrorism did indeed increase tenfold, carried by Palestinian groups who rejected the peace process. On the other side, there were also right-wing Israelis who were trying to sabotage the peace process, by doing things like building settlements in the disputed territories. Nevertheless, the two nations braved on, and the peace process continued to advance. And then, in 2005, the Palestinians voted for Hamas to lead the government. Hamas is a jihadist movement. Its charter basically adopts Nazi anti-Semitism and distills it to be even more hateful, defining the Jews as the root of all evil in the world. On top of that, it also adds Muslim anti-Semitism, like a hadith that says that all Jews must be killed. The hope was that once they came into power, Hamas would realize that they have to adapt to the peace process, but that did not happen. Hamas leaders rejected the previously signed agreements, refused to revoke the genocidal charter, and denied Israel's right to exist. This led to a civil war with the Fatah movement that supports the peace process, and the result was that the Palestinian Authority was split between the West Bank that is ruled by Fatah and Gaza that is ruled by Hamas. Israel reacted by placing a blockade on Gaza, aimed at preventing it from building up militarily, and giving the Gaza government 3 conditions to the lifting of the blockade. It has to recognize Israel's right to exist, it has to renounce terrorism, and it has to accept the validity of the previous agreements. But the Hamas government refused to budge. Instead, it turned Gaza into a terrorist base, and is brainwashing its children with extreme anti-Semitic propaganda. The 2 million citizens of Gaza are sinking into poverty and despair, but for Hamas, that's just a sacrifice that they have to pay in the name of jihad. There is no question of who is right and wrong here. If you support human rights and want the peace process to succeed, you must support Israel against the Gaza government. The only way to advance in the peace process is for the Gaza government to agree to Israel's 3 very simple conditions. The Israeli left, to its credit, is almost unanimously standing by its government on this issue. The Western regressive left, on the other hand, is with Gaza. For them, the Palestinians are the protected group that can do no wrong, and they will stand by them even if what they advocate is the destruction of Israel and the extermination of all Jews. If the world stood behind Israel on this issue, the Gaza government would realize that it has no choice but to acquiesce to Israel's conditions. But since they are getting all that support, the Gaza government believes that it just has to wait until Israel caves to international pressure and negotiates with it on its terms. That's never going to happen, since there is no Israeli insane enough to negotiate with Hamas until it changes. And so, the suffering continues. Here's an example of how the regressive left helps Hamas. In 2014, Hamas leader Khaled Mashal was interviewed by CBS and reiterated his group's position that they do not recognize Israel's right to exist.
Do you want to coexist with the state of Israel? Do you want to recognize Israel as a Jewish state?
No. I said I do not want to live with a state of occupiers. I do coexist with other religions.
Assuming they're no longer occupiers. At that point, do you want to coexist and recognize their right to exist as they would recognize your right to exist?
When we have a Palestinian state, then the Palestinian state will decide on its policies. You cannot actually ask me about the future.
Mashal uses the word occupation because he knows that when Westerners hear occupation, they think he is talking about the West Bank and Gaza. But when Hamas says occupation, what they mean is any sovereign Jewish entity in the Middle East. Israel, by its very existence, is occupation in the worldview. Charlie Rose, to his credit, pressures him on it, forcing him to fall back on the Hamas regular position. After we have our state, then we will vote on it. Meaning, after Israel gives away all its bargaining chips, and allows us to form a state in the West Bank and Gaza that has the power to launch rockets and suicide bombers into every major city in Israel, then we will have a vote whether or not we will give the Jews what they want. This is the same bullshit we've heard from Hamas for the past decade. Now, how do you think Cenk reported on it?
the reason it's untenable is because Hamas has this point in their negotiations, in their non-existent so-called negotiations with Israel, that they will not agree to say that Israel has the right to exist. Only in the final peace deal will they give the concession that they think, okay, Israel exists. The world's worst negotiating strategy, if you ask me. But so when Charlie Rose asks him, okay, do you think Israel exists? Well, either he's got to say, no, I don't think they should exist, which sounds ridiculous, right? Or he's got to give away his main bargaining chip at the negotiation table and go, yeah, they have a right to exist. Oh, damn it, now we got nothing.
So first of all, Cenk wants you to believe that Mashal's rejectionism is just a strategy, that Hamas actually does believe in a two-state solution, but they are withholding recognition of Israel to use it as a bargaining chip. He makes it seem like it is the only bargaining chip that the Palestinians have, when in fact, the main chip has always been that they will end the violence. Secondly, the very fact that he treats this as a legitimate bargaining chip is outrageous, showing that he believes that the basic right of Jews to sovereignty is something that can be negotiated, something that the Palestinians, or anyone else for that matter, can vote on. Third, he neglects to mention that the previous Palestinian government already recognized Israel's right to exist, and Hamas, as the current government, must abide by it. Israel agreed to give the Palestinians self-rule, and exposed its citizens to Palestinian terrorism only on the basis of that recognition. If Israel agreed to allow the Palestinians to just ignore previous agreements after they get what they want, there would be no worth to any future agreements it signs with them, and there will never be peace. And finally, he doesn't mention that by refusing to recognize Israel, Hamas is perpetuating the blockade of Gaza and the suffering of the Palestinian people. If he did that, he'd be compelled to ask why they are making their people suffer. And then he would have to admit that it is because they don't want to give up on their raison d'etre, which is the elimination of Israel.
Okay. Now, in reality, you can tell what his actual answers are through two things. One, we already know that unofficially through Iran, Hamas has let it be known that they will accept those terms if there is a peace deal at the end.
That's a bold-faced lie.
Number two, you saw at the end of his answer there, well, if the Palestinians agree that, Israel should exist, well, then what can we do? That's his way of saying, at the end, when there's a peace deal, obviously that's what we'll give up.
And here we see the regressive idiocy on full display. An ideological group, especially a jihadist ideological group, will never give up on anything, unless it has absolutely no other choice. But Cenk, once again, hears what he wants to hear. And since he is bigoted favorably towards the Palestinians, he interprets Mashal's words as peaceful. Hamas knows that there are many useful idiots like Cenk, and its rhetoric is designed to allow them to interpret it in the way that they want, and be its spokespersons in the West. But when you listen to what is actually being said, nothing in it ever contradicts the Hamas charter.
But Hamas has always had the wrong strategy. They have the wrong strategy in terms of violence. They have the wrong negotiation strategy that paints them as the bad guys. Whether you think they are the bad guys or not, if you're on Hamas's side, well, then that's a stupid strategy, isn't it? Because even though you're being blocked from existence, you're getting all the blame for saying theoretically you would block Israel from existence. I mean, it's impossible to not feel bad for the Palestinians when these are the guys representing them.
This is what Cenk has been driving at. Israel are the bigots. The Palestinians are innocent victims. The Palestinians want to live in coexistence with Israel, but their stupid leaders are using the wrong strategy to get it. In reality, although the majority of Palestinians aren't as extreme as Hamas, the ideas espoused by Hamas are very prevalent in the Palestinian society. I mean, when they had a chance to vote, they voted for Hamas. You do know that, Cenk, right?
Whether we like it or we don't, Hamas won an election in the Palestinian territories, right? Now, of course, as soon as they won the election, Israel said, and the US said, democracy, we didn't really mean it. No. You don't get to choose your leaders, right?
Wrong. Israel and the US completely accepted the results of the Palestinian elections. Israel would not be blockading Gaza if it didn't accept that Hamas is the one in charge there. What Cenk actually means here is that Israel and the US should have accepted the will of the Palestinian people. The Palestinians voted for a government that wants to destroy Israel and exterminate all Jews, so Israel and the US must accept that as a legitimate position, and negotiate with the Palestinian government the terms by which the Jews are to be slaughtered. I shall leave it for you to decide what that says about Cenk, and the many other regressives who are using this talking point. And Cenk is only moderately regressive on this issue. At least he opposes Hamas and supports a two-state solution. Many other regressives have completely committed themselves to helping the Gaza government, and many of them now reject Israel's right to exist. The same regressive logic that makes them stand with Black Lives Matter also drives them to stand with Hamas, a genocidal jihadist organization. And so, protected and supported by the regressive left, the Gaza government keeps on believing that it can carry on until victory. The moderate Palestinians, those who want a two-state solution, are maligned by the regressive left that sees them as collaborators with the evil Israelis, and their standing in the Palestinian society is weakened. And in Israel, this turn of events has politically destroyed the left, and the right has been in control ever since. Thousands of people have died in recent years in the clashes between Israel and Gaza, and it looks like many more will die. The Western regressive left is complicit in the death of each and every one of them. And now, the West is beginning to feel what Israel goes through, as jihadism is becoming a growing problem. And whenever anyone tries to deal honestly with the problem, they are being shouted down by the same regressives. The result, just like in Israel, is the rise of the right wing, which might even bring back the far right, and some real bigotry. In such a reality, it is crucial that we save the left, make it liberal again. But the way to save it is not just to point and laugh at the regressives. We have to self-criticize, to understand how we got here. This is what I'm trying to do, and will continue to do, in this series. Liberals have worked for centuries to change our culture and make it more tolerant, to teach people to think in ways that accept the other and do not judge people by their group stereotype. The regressives have taken all that hard work and twisted it, taking us back to ways of thinking that we thought we are finally left behind. Generalizing, otherizing, dehumanizing, bigoteering, inciting hate against groups that they don't like, legitimizing even the worst forms of bigotry if it is espoused by groups that they do like. They are threatening to reverse all the progress that has been made, to march us backwards to a darker age. And that is why they are the regressive left.